All right, to the White House now, where we've got that someone to stop violent extremism. But, of course, they're not calling it Islamic extremism. To Ed Henry, where things are kicked off just today. Ed.
Well, Neil, what's interesting is Vice President Biden started this three-day summit off today by saying we need to find other tools beyond just the U.S. military to fight ISIS. He's referring to social media, perhaps, to push back on the terrorist narrative, also the economy, economic tools, because the State Department spokesman Marie Harf is getting some ridicule today for saying yesterday on MSNBC that part of this is finding people jobs, and that might help defeat ISIS, not just war. Marie Harf went on Twitter today to push back by noting that former President George W. Bush also said that you need to fight poverty in order to deal with terrorism, though retired General Jack Keane says that these kinds of other tools can only take you so far in this dramatic battle. Listen.
We're here today because we all understand that in dealing with violent extremism that we need answers that go beyond a military answer. We need answers that go beyond force.
You do have to counter the narrative, undermine the ideology, stop the finance, and get at the root causes of political reform, social injustice, and economic repression. That is true. But in front of us is ISIS, who is marauding over Iraq and Syria and now Libya. The only way to stop them is to kill and capture.
Now, to General Keene's point, just in the last couple of hours, there's been reports surfacing that up to 45 Iraqis were burned alive in western Iraq by ISIS. Of course, this would come just a couple of days after that gruesome beheading of 21 Christians in Libya by ISIS as well. The body count continuing to grow. I pressed Jen Psaki, another State Department spokeswoman, about whether or not they've confirmed that. They say they're aware of these reports of 45 Iraqis being burned alive in the similar manner, dragged in cages and then burned alive, just like that Jordanian pilot. Remember that one gruesome death some weeks ago really shocked the world. In this case, it may be far, far worse than that, Neil.
Ed Henry at the White House, thank you. Well, America's mayor has heard enough.
That exists. It's for real. They can close their eyes to it all they want, but it is going on. The danger.
So if you were invited to such a conference,
I would use it, and they'd have to throw me out.
All right, we have a lot more with former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani on my Fox Business Show tonight at 8 p.m. He has a strategy for dealing with this by, first of all, calling this what it is. Now, to retired U.S. Army Colonel Danny McKnight, who has an idea himself. Danny, always good to have you. Does it make a big deal to you, Danny, to call this what it is, Islamic extremism? Eric Holder, the Attorney General, was saying earlier today that it was more or less a Fox fixation, that very few really talk about it. Do you agree with that?
I see this only one thing. It is Islamic extremism at the ultimate, especially with the recent events that we've seen in just this last week alone. They can paint it and call it whatever they want. They can talk about jobs. Sure, jobs always help, if you're, going to try and help people that are really impoverished and everything. But this is not about that. This is extremely difficult to imagine anything other than the most violent thing that I've seen in a long time.
And you know, Danny, the history of these groups far better than I ever will. But I do seem to remember that half of the 9/11 hijackers came from fairly well-to-do Saudi families. So obviously a job or financial security isn't the issue here so much as just butchery. So what is the answer?
Well, unfortunately, I think this has taken a turn in the past 7 to 10 days that has shown violence and just death beyond what we could ever imagine. I don't think you're going to solve that any other way than we're going to have to get there and face them. And we're going to have to fight our tails off. And we're going to have to do that, because if we don't, Neil, what I'm afraid of is the next thing we're going to see is some of those kind of gruesome things happening in our own country. And I don't think we're ready for that yet.
You know, Colonel, one thing I always think about when I see these incidents, how they're up the ante, from beheadings to burning a guy alive in a cage, to then multiple beheadings simultaneously, to, if these early reports are right, killing dozens in a single violent act, burning them to death. I'm just beginning to wonder what's behind this thinking, if they want to alarm us, scare us, let them know that there's nothing we are doing that is even remotely giving them pause? What?
Well, I think their goal is truly to show that they're the most powerful thing, and they will do anything that's necessary to show that they're in charge. And right now, if you look at what's going on and you see the reaction that we're giving right now, I don't think we're doing anything to make them be fearful that we're going to, attack them or anything like this. I see what happened in Jordan, and I applaud them. I applaud the Jordanian president for stepping up and saying we're going to do something. Well, right now I don't see us doing that, and I'm really concerned about that military base that's in very close to proximity to a possible attack in the very near future, and I think we all know about that because it's also been on the news.
Now, the quick question I want to just end with here is where you think this goes to the next level. We have this 60-nation, 3-day summit on all of this going on at the White House. What do you think comes of it?
What do I think comes of a summit in the White House to talk about ISIS? Well, they're probably going to just sort of piddle-paddle around like they have with everything else. They're probably not going to come out with any great decisions on, yeah, we're going to put boots on the ground. We're going to start facing these people and start making sure they understand that they're not going to be allowed to get away with this kind of Islamic extremism. And what bothers me about the Islamic extremism idea, it does exist, but I've met Muslims that I have no problem with them. They're not all that way, and I think people need to understand that. But we are seeing probably the worst that I think we've seen in probably the past 50 years of what's going on right now, Neil, and I hope it stops.
And people can, distinguish between the two. I think you're right about that. Colonel, always a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Neil.
Danny Knight. Well, a judge halting the president's immigration plan, that has a lot of conservatives saying, great. I want you to meet the sheriff who's about to tell them it's too late.